Welcome to episode 15 of Renewing the Conversation, a series of interviews where we talk to leading industry professionals and experts about renewable energy and heating, with a focus on the home and what challenges face the industry and homeowners.
Today, welcome back Graham Hendra from ABC Heat Pumps. We catch up with Graham and discuss everything from our carbon footprint to his flashy two-door sports car.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and please show us your support by giving us a thumbs up. Enjoy the interview.
So we're joined by Graham, our good friend over at ABC Heat Pumps. We're just going to have a general chit chat today. But before we kick off, we're going to start with something a little bit different. I believe that, Graham, you have a question for us.
Yes, it's something I ask in every training course and whenever I meet anyone who's kind of into sustainability or renewables and whatever, because it always tickles me, this question, that generally the answer is generally the same. So everybody who doesn't live under a rock is aware there is a thing called a carbon footprint. Now, everyone's heard that phrase. And I like to ask people, as an average citizen of the UK, what is your carbon footprint in either kilograms or tons of CO2 per year?
Wow. Over to the family geek. What is our carbon footprint, Mars?
I actually don't know what our exact carbon footprint is, but I know that we've obviously done as many things as we possibly can to try and lower that. So if we just look at our solar PV by itself, over the course of the last 2.5 years, we've saved 4.5 tons of CO2 from going into the atmosphere just solely from that. Our heat pump in the winter probably saves about 20 kilograms a day, somewhere around there. So we're doing as much as we can with regards to dropping that. Meat consumption is obviously quite a big one. We've drastically cut back our meat consumption. We're not vegetarian or vegan, but from eating meat maybe on a daily basis a few years ago, now we're doing it maybe twice a week or once a week. And that in itself saves probably about 70 kilograms. So we're doing what we can, but to actually pinpoint exactly what our carbon footprint is, I actually don't know. And
it's a really loaded question, because I think that in order to really calculate your carbon footprint, you'd have to take so much into consideration. You'd have to look at, for example, your clothes. Are you buying fast fashion? Are you getting a lot of deliveries to the house? What transportation are you using? Are you commuting? Are you taking lots of holidays and traveling? So there's just so much to consider with that, isn't there? I would be very intrigued to know one day if there's like some clever little app that comes up that, can calculate everything, almost like, I suppose, like one of those diet apps that calculates your calories. But you'd be pressing the button every 5 minutes to say, oh, I've just made a cup of tea, I've just done this, I've just done that. It would be endless, wouldn't it?
And also, if you go and buy a can of Coke from the shop, it doesn't say on the side of the can of Coke how many kilos of CO2 it is. But the reason I ask this is that in our sector, we say to you, buy a heat pump, stick one in, you will save a ton or 2 tons or whatever it is per year. And that might be an enormous amount of carbon, but it might be nothing. And if you have no benchmark at all, how do you know? So there are websites you can go on and pummel everything in. And obviously people have very, very varied amounts of carbon depending on how you live your life. But there's a really simple calculation where if you take the total carbon output of the UK and divide it by all 66 million of us, you end up with 9,000 kilos of CO2 per person per annum, which is really convenient because that works out at 1 kilo an hour. So I always say to people, it's divided into 3. So there's 1/3 of that, or 1 Coke can's worth. The Coke can weighs 1/3 of a kilo. That is your travel. That is you moving around. The second Coke can is your house, which is essentially your heating. There's a little bit for lights and everything else, but mostly heating. And the third Coke can is the stuff you buy and are responsible for, buildings, clothes, etc. So it just gives a really, really interesting sort of perspective of it, that over the course of this interview, you will get 3 Coke cans worth of CO2 and chuck them into the sky. And so will I, and so will Mars. We're all doing it all the time. And I think it's really nice to measure it in that really simple way. But you will get people, and the common answer also that you get to that is it doesn't really matter what we do because we're all amazing in the UK. The problem is the Chinese. Because the Chinese emit 3 tons of CO2 per person per year.
Wow.
They're 1/3 of us. The Americans are 3 times higher than us. They're 30 tons per person per year. Which obviously there's some good Americans and bad Americans and good UK and so on, but they're just, I always think that when we're doing things like COP26 and so on, they should be talking about these numbers so that when I say to you, have a heat pump, it will save you 1,000 kilos, you can look at that and go, is that worth doing?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So obviously Greta came out and she said that she thought that COP26 was just a greenwashing festival. Do you think that they were talking about the right things because they really ended up focusing at the end on coal, for example, with heat pumps and, electricity, and we need to start thinking really heavily about how much our electricity consumption is going to start to increase. And then therefore, how is that electricity kind of being produced? I think that, there are some people that just think electricity just happens. It just comes, a machine turns around and it produces electricity and that's it. They kind of don't realize that actually there's other components involved in that. And actually your electricity can be produced in a green way or not in a sustainable way. With heat pumps and renewables, more conversation needs to be had on electricity and how that's going to be provided to kind of sustain heat pumps.
Yeah, I mean, the whole debate has a fundamental problem, which is that you can't see what you're doing. You can't see your CO2. And I don't know where my electricity comes from. It just comes out the walls in our house because it's kind of, you kind of subcontract the risk away. And I think one of my frustration with the whole thing is the governments tell us what we should do, right? And I'm sure that you, probably not so much you, but definitely me, every time I go and see the doctor, he tells me that I should exercise more and I should eat less. And I'm 51. And clearly the message isn't working because I'm still fat. And the government are taking the same view with carbon. They go, use less electricity, turn the heating down, drive less. And so on. We go, yeah, I know I should. Anyhow, I'm just going to drive to the shops. So I think the only way, that we are going to change is through legislation. And I like to tell a story about my dad. So my dad's 85. He lived in central London in the 50s when the smog was around. And he said he used to go home through the smog and the terrible pollution. And he used to get home and everyone knew the pollution came from burning coal in your fireplace. And I said, Dad, did you ever think of not lighting the coal fire when you went home? He went, no, it was freezing. So I said, so you were causing the problem along with everyone else. And what changed was they changed to smokeless fuel, and that solved the smog. But that was a piece of legislation. I'm sure there were a few people who went, I won't light the coal fire because it's bad outside. But most people went, I'm cold, and that's more important. And I think that's the really sad thing is that I feel that we are probably going to be made to go more towards solar panel, made to go towards heat pumps and so on. I think that actually if you let people decide, some will, of course, the early adopters, people like you and I have done it. I think most people will do what they're told and choose the fuel that they are made to have.
Is it controversial to ask you, being that you're heat pump guy and you're very well known as being, the heat pump guy, you're a strong advocate for heat pumps. So I'd be really curious to know what your opinion is on other renewables. So for example, do you think that it kind of needs to be hard and fast on heat pumps on all properties moving towards heat pumps only? Or do you think that there is space for example, like HVO, hydro-treated vegetable oils being used for boilers that, for example, in properties that might be too small for a heat pump or that might not have the costs or want to go through the rigmarole of installing a heat pump. So do you think that heat pumps play a part within all renewables, or do you think that we just kind of need to really focus on heat pumps?
I think you should try and do something. I have a heat pump because I'm a heat pump guy. I love the technology. There's nothing wrong with biomass. It has its place. There's nothing wrong with recycled vegetable oil. It has its place. All of them have their place, just like you can buy a gas boiler, an oil boiler, an LPG boiler, or whatever. I think that what we need to try and get people to do is just to do something. Get a solar panel, be it solar thermal, solar PV, buy a battery, have a thing. I think the the view of doing nothing is becoming less acceptable, which is good. But I'm always very careful of this, because it wouldn't take you very long to have a dabble around on the internet and work out that I own 9 motorbikes, none of which have a battery. I've just bought a new car which isn't electric. So I'm not the sustainability guy. I always think hypocrisy is a nightmare. And someone asked me, what's it like being a leader in sustainability? And I said, I'm not. I just love heat pumps.
Yeah.
That's it. And if you want to buy a Range Rover, that's your choice. If you want to fly 15 times a year, that's your choice at the moment. If they want to stop us doing that, I think the only way is to stop us doing that. It's like smoking in pubs. We used to smoke in pubs. I don't think many people would want to go back to smoking in pubs now, but we all said the world was going to end if we stopped smoking in pubs, and it turns out it wasn't so bad. That was legislation. No one stopped smoking in pubs just because it was good for us.
Yeah, I think that from my personal perspective of the kind of the coverage that we had in 2021 of heat pumps, is that it became so almost polarized in the media, and I kind of felt like it was almost becoming a little bit fundamental. It was like, we were kind of people being told to very quickly make a choice on something that they really didn't know a huge amount about. And they were being told, okay, it was almost kind of like this vegan, vegetarian kind of argument. It's like, you have to either quickly switch over and be a fully fledged heat pump, advocate, or you're completely against all renewables. And I just kind of felt like it was just really unhelpful and wasn't constructive in moving forward. I totally agree with you. I think that each person needs to do what they can at that moment that's sustainable for them, from not just an environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective, what they can afford for their family at that time. And if that means taking small steps towards that, then I think that, that's what we have to kind of encourage and not bash, because I feel like, as soon as you start bashing people for making small steps, then they just withdraw and they make 0 steps. So I'd rather just someone makes a little effort than no effort at all.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy, isn't it, that there are things you can do which actually do save you money and do your bit. Yeah, for instance, I hound my wife about turning lights off in rooms we're not in. It only makes a tiny difference, but it's just a waste. You turn up, and I'm sure you've done it, you turn up, every light in the house is on. You go, what are we doing? Yeah, we're all in the lounge, just turn off the lights. That saves everyone money. It does a little bit of carbon. And I think, you kind of go, come on, guys, try and be fairly pleasant to your fellow man and polar bear and turn some lights off. I think there's something a little bit sort of horrible about middle class people like us going around telling people you need to spend £10,000 on a heating system. It may be affordable for some of us, but spending other people's money I don't like it. If you came around my house and said, Graham, you have to have your house painted because we don't like the color, I tell you where to go. So I think let's get people to start the journey. As you say, maybe eat a little bit less meat, because that might save them some money too. Get them a little bit along those journeys. But the thing that always makes me laugh is, and I always talk about my typical customer. And I'm sure you can imagine the scene. They're sat round the dinner table with their friends. They're all telling everyone how wonderfully green they are and how they've taken the train and they didn't fly on holiday this year, as they pull the cork out of another bottle of wine that's come all the way from Chile and eat their broccoli that's come from Peru. It's quite easy to expose the hypocrisy, which is why I'm not a sort of green warrior. I kind of go, well, I've done a thing, the easy thing for me. It would be nice if everyone tried a little bit, but you can't convince everyone of everything. People support different football teams and they'll all tell you they're the best football team. So you can't make everyone follow a single message.
I think it doesn't help that I've also found that this year I found that the messaging from the leaders has just been really confusing. Like, I just haven't fully understood what's going on, because on the one hand we've had all this kind of summer seemed to be like heat pumps were in every single newspaper. We were seeing so many articles on heat pumps, and there was so much drive. The government was constantly talking about it. It was debated in Parliament. I mean, everybody was talking about it. And then then there was a discussion of, are they going to open another coal mine? Are they going to start processing more coal. There was just electricity. We had the energy crisis, and electricity providers started to go. And there's more subsidies for gas, but there's no government subsidies for electricity.
I was just going to segue into that. I mean, for me, the biggest disconnect at the moment has been this drive towards heat pumps, which consume electricity. Now, you've got a situation that's unfolded in the UK where last year heat pumps were very, very cheap to run. They were, on par with gas. They were much cheaper to run than oil. Fast forward, not even 12 months, and our heat pump has virtually become unaffordable to run because the electricity tariff has just become so expensive. So, it seems that they're pushing one element of it, but they're not trying to satisfy another that will make the transition to heat pumps that little bit easier and seamless for the majority of households across the UK.
But this might sound somewhat controversial, but you speak like you think that they know what on earth they're doing.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of a case of it's a huge problem overall, and not one person is in charge of it. There's probably hundreds of people in the committee, and what you really need to do is get them all together and go, can we have a little bit of joined up thinking? Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's kind of really bizarre. But there's a lot of talk in our industry about we should pull the subsidy off gas and move it to electricity. And I always like to think, well, what would happen? Let's assume they do that tomorrow morning. So they're going to flip the switch and move it over. So my next door neighbour's gas boiler that currently costs him £100 a month is now going to be £200 a month because my electricity in my heat pump has now halved in cost. I'm happy. He's obviously not very happy. 83% of houses in the UK have got gas boilers. That's a lot of voters.
It is a lot of voters, but I do feel like, for example, our electricity tariff, I think last winter was about 14, 16p, something like
11
that.
at its cheapest.
And now we've just been
23, 24.
We've just been dumped onto Eon. And so I do kind of feel like this winter, I think it would be remiss of me to say that I didn't feel like, as a heat pump owner that has been encouraged to do the right thing environmentally and has gone through the admin and the headache of going through that process, and it is quite a process. I do feel like this year, with the eye-watering tariffs of like 24p a kilowatt, you kind of end up feeling like, gosh, am I being penalized a little bit here? Like, it just seems a little bit unfair for those kind of homeowners that have got those heat pumps installed.
If I could just jump onto that before Graham actually comments on that, is that I don't think that actually shifting the policy costs from gas onto electricity is necessarily the good thing to do, purely because there's so many people that are still on gas. I think that the government should look at creating some sort of government-funded heat pump tariff, because our heat pump, I just try to do the maths, let's say we're saving 500 kilograms in carbon that we're not emitting into the atmosphere. What is that going to cost the government to put some sort of scheme in as a carbon capture type thing? It's going to cost them a damn sight more than that. So
and somebody mentioned to us the other day that Italy has got a special tariff for heat pump owners, and so you get that reduced tariff, so that really helps those homeowners.
I think that will come. That is a great solution, is that you go, if you opt to go this way, you can get reduced rate electricity. It's a great thing. I believe, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe that if you have a Tesla battery, you can access a very, very low cost tariff, 8-9p a kilowatt hour. So it's kind of like you've taken the journey, you've paid your own money, but you get some help. So I think that sort of thing will definitely come along, and that's a great way of doing it. And it's fairer. You have a choice. Would you like to go cheap? Yes, you have to invest some money. If you don't want to do that, you carry on with what you've got. It's a really, really difficult thing to try and sell to people. I read an amazing book called Energy by Vaclav Smil. It's really, really easy to read. And he was talking about this myth that efficiency will get us out of the problem. And he said, I'll give you an example of lighting. He said, if you look at lighting in the 70s, I know you two are much too young to remember the 70s. But
we're both born in the 70s, Graham. We were both born in the 70s.
My parents had 2 strip lights in the kitchen. and that lit the kitchen. And we thought that was great. And I went round to see my dad. He's still in the same house, and he must have 30 or 40 LED bulbs in that kitchen now.
Wow.
So the LED bulbs are really, really efficient, but there's loads of them. And so the actual amount of energy he's consuming is the same. It's just brighter in there. So it's kind of a bit of a weird one, isn't it? If you think of the cars we had in the 70s were very slow and underpowered, you now buy a Tesla and it's faster than the Ferrari from the 80s. Surely it would be more efficient if that Tesla was only as fast as a car from the 70s or 80s. So we kind of want that improvement. Houses are getting warmer because we turn the heating up. And it's really, you can imagine if Boris jumped on the TV tomorrow and said, guys, can we get some of the lights turned off, turn off half the iPads, turn the thermostats down a smidgen, and why don't we go to the shops with our neighbours in their car? You'd all think he was a lunatic. But actually, that's kind of where we've probably got to go. And it's a really uncomfortable thing to start saying to people, your quality of living might have to fall. And you go, well, I'm not voting for that. I love my Spanish holiday, or, Portofino in the spring is allegedly very nice. So I think there is very much a thing of, I think that you guys shouldn't fly anymore. I'm flying, but you shouldn't. And I was speaking to a lady on a train coming back from COP26, and I said, there's also an element, and I know this is not very, people probably don't say this, I'm probably being too honest. There's a possibility that we could have some restriction on how much we fly in the future. It's possible. So let's get in there and fly now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I couldn't possibly comment on whether I'm doing that. But, if you've got relatives in Australia, you might have to take a ship in 20 years. So let's fly out there this Christmas, which isn't doing anyone any good. But that there is a sort of bit of that out there. I'm really intrigued to see how it all unravels over the next few years. But we've all got to do something.
We do. I had a recent thought about this whole target of installing the 600,000 heat pumps by 2028 or a million or whatever it is. One, there's probably a lack of installers today, but two, are there going to be enough customers? Are enough people actually going to want to, take on these heat pumps?
I think we talked about this in a previous video, was if you got home today and your heating had stopped running, you want a heating engineer, you ring the heating engineer, he comes around, he or she comes around and says, right, I can get this running today. I can go and get your boiler and get it on the wall. And you go, no, I want to go green. Okay, heat pump. First off, does that guy even do heat pumps? So that's a potential problem. Can he get a heat pump quickly?
Yeah.
Can he just put it on instead of your boiler? I mean, most people think about their boiler the day their boiler goes wrong. And here's a question for you. You kind of a heat pump geeks. When did you last see your heat pump?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Yeah, we weren't having a great time of it this weekend. So
you don't, as a rule, go out and check on it. And there's so many boiler, you don't look at it much, and then it goes bang, and then you go, oh God, I'll go and have a look at it. So I think that as an industry, we need to get more people trained is obvious, but we need to concentrate on the guy walks into the plumbers merchants or B&Q and says, heat pump, boiler, it's that easy a decision. That's how to get it done. And I genuinely believe that's going to be the case. And one of the reasons why I like my job to be harder than it needs to be. So one of the reasons why I no longer sell heat pumps is the really tough times of trying to learn how to do everything are gone. All that experience is out there. It is getting easier and easier. It's boring now. It's like ready meals. So, and it will get more. And where I fit into the equation, that my job doesn't exist anymore. You don't need, once the systems are simple and easy and you just plonk them in, last thing you need is overpaid people who know the intricacies of the unit. You think about your boiler. If your boiler goes wrong, the guy doesn't fix it, he replaces it. And I think heat pumps will be like that. It may take 10 or 15 years, but as they become more popular, you'll see that. It's really interesting to see how it runs in parallel with electric cars. It's the same argument. an electric car's a car, it works. There's a load of arguments for not having them. There's a load of arguments for having them, depending on which side of the fence you sit. But, why doesn't everyone just buy an electric car?
Why didn't you?
One of the problems of being 51 is that you've only got a tiny bit of cool left. And you genuinely worry about looking cool going forward. So I thought, I need a sports car. And I need a 2-door sports car, so I look more handsome and thinner than I really am.
Right.
And you can't buy an electric 2-seater yet, but Porsche are bringing one out in 3 years' time.
Yeah, but doesn't Tesla have that kind of sex appeal?
Nice. Well, Tesla's a brilliant car for people who don't like cars.
Oh,
wow.
Ouch. My goodness, I'm so glad I don't own a Tesla.
No, I mean, the thing is...
Definitely, comment below. Just comment below. Just knock yourself out,
don't
people.
Put that out.
Hashtag Tesla.
Video, is it? No, the thing is, I mean, my colleague's got a Tesla. He's not a car guy, right? He's a computer guy. And he loves his Tesla. It's got all the gimmicks and all that kind of stuff. And the fact it's got 4 wheels on it, so
That's
what? I think he'd love it just as much if it was on blocks in the drive. And yeah, they're good cars, but yeah, I wanted a sports car. If I'm honest, I wanted to look with that tiny bit of cool left. I've always wanted a Lamborghini, and I worked in Renewable, so there's no money.
Wow. So you didn't get a Lamborghini? Did you get a Lamborghini?
No, I work in heat pumps. I couldn't afford one.
Wow. Even a vintage one is eye-watering.
If I had a Lamborghini, I would have put that on LinkedIn.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
But no, I would love one. And yeah, one day if I made a fortune, I would buy one because I've always wanted one. But that's because of my age. When I was in the 70s, you had a picture of a Lamborghini on the wall of your bedroom. I guess the kids now have a picture of a Tesla on their bedroom. I don't know.
So if you've got so much faith in the Italians making, cool things like Lamborghinis, why are they not making heat pumps? Are they making heat pumps? Do you know if any?
Yeah, there are a few. A lot of the really big stuff's made in Italy, the big commercial stuff. I think the main reason is that the air conditioning industry is based in the Far East.
Yeah.
And they were the natural place to go. Actually, I'm doing a blog this Sunday on, there's a scoop this, I'm doing a blog this Sunday on Daikin.
Oh, okay.
The Daikin have always been the innovators. Everything that is clever in air conditioning was done by Daikin first.
Okay.
And for some peculiar reason, they've never really innovated much in heat pumps. It's always been a bit kind of all right. But Daikin have a very strange thing they do. They probably don't even know they do it. You need to be outside to see it. They always produce an incredibly eye-wateringly complicated machine just before the machine that changes the world. And their current heat pump is horribly complicated, not very good. So, but my blog is going to be, come on, Daikin, let's see the next one.
So how does Jason Cassells fall into the innovation conversation?
But he, as you know well, and I watched his video. He is kind of like my mentor and my guru. He's pushing the envelope like the clappers with the RED unit. It's very, very clever what he's done. But he's built a premium product, so it will always be in the sort of top end houses. I'm sure he's going to look at sort of a more mainstream machine. But we have to be brutally honest. One of the big Japanese or Chinese manufacturers who can churn out 1 million units a year, they're like Ford. Jason Cassells is like Lamborghini. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I
didn't want to say to him on the interview because I didn't know. You never know whether someone's going to be insulted or flattered. But I said to Mars when we got off, I said, "Do you think that he's the next Dyson? Do you think that we're going to be seeing him as Sir Jason Cassells in in a couple of years?" I think that it's possible because he is just so innovative, and you can tell that he's his passion for it is just, you know, it's contagious. I mean, you speak to the guy, and you know, by the end of the interview, I wanted to buy red. He didn't sell us red. He didn't barely talked about, you know, pushing the red to us. But by the end of it, I just thought, I've got to buy something from this guy, because whatever he is selling, it's going to work. It's going to be brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, I was the same. That's how I ended up working with him. You know, that somebody said, speak to this guy who knows a bit about heat pumps. And I thought, oh, yeah, here we go. And I was blown away. I think there's the story. I can never remember which way round it is, but there's it depends who tells you the story too. But Rolls and Royce, one of them was a salesman, one was an engineer. And my dad's an engineer, so he always says that the salesman ripped the other fella off. And as I got older, I'm like, hang on a second, that's what Jason Cassells is like. He's the genius engineer. What he needs to meet is whether it's the Rolls or the Royce, who's the guy that takes him to the 1 million pieces a year. Yeah. And then there'll be the tragic story of how, you know, the salesman took all the money again. But
or that he's moving to Singapore.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I would love to see someone like Jason working inside Daikin or Samsung or whatever, but those big companies probably wouldn't allow him to operate how he does. He's a genius because he's allowed to do his own mistakes. And I get that I've worked in big companies, and they won't let you spend thousands and thousands of pounds or millions of pounds buggering something up. You have got to get it right. So yeah, I think he's very, very, I think a lot of what he's done we'll see in other units. I've been to a lot of factories I love a factory, but you know, Daikin, LG, Samsung and so on. And when you go around those factories, if you look behind dust sheets, there's other people's units which they're testing. And I would be amazed if there's not a red or two dotted around somewhere.
Just to kind of wind up 2021, what was your opinion when the government said that they were going to phase out the RHI and they were going to give a £5,000 grant to heat pump buyers? And then equally so, were you as insulted as I was, even though I'm not a ground source? I'm not in the business of buying ground source. I'm not going to buy a ground source, but I just thought for the differentiate, for it to go from 5,000 to 6,000 as a budget for heat pump to ground, sorry, air source to ground source, I thought was a bit, I thought that was unreasonable as well. So is there much talk in the industry about those schemes for next year?
Oh yes, we've predicted the end of the world. It's depending on who you ask. Essentially, the way I view it is that we as an industry have been subsidised for the last 7.5 years. So some of us idiots were in this before the grants. It was tough then, but it's still tough now. But the way I view it is there has been no downward pressure on pricing in our industry for 7 years, because why bother dropping the cost? What the government have essentially done, so when the RHI first came in, it was unlimited. So we would focus on very, very large houses where they get huge RHIs, and you'd be putting 30, 40, 50,000 pound heat pumps in. Quite quickly, I guess they spotted that this looked like it was favouring the wealthy. So the RHI basically favoured the middle class. Let's be honest, you guys had to pay for your heat pump, so you must have had the money, and then you got your money back. But if you didn't have any money, where were you going to get the 10 grand that you were going to get back? Moving it to an upfront means it pushes it again slightly down the scale, again, the sort of financial scale. So it moves it away from the very, very expensive houses to the cheaper and so on. And it helps people who haven't got the cash up front. So it's just a progression of where we move the money to. So I think that what we'll see next year is we'll focus more on smaller houses, lower heat losses, smaller heat pumps, because the 5 grand makes an impact. Yeah. And a little bit of the old, well, I'm really sorry, but if you live in a 400 metre squared Victorian cottage and it's going to cost 30 grand, you've had your chance. Yeah, the money was there. You missed the boat. And I'm all right with that. I think it will push the price of the kit down, the price of the installation down. It has to. The grant that's the thing that made me laugh when this announcement came out. Boris came on the telly and said, hello, I'm halving the grant.
Yeah.
And the grant.
So thanks so much for joining us, Graham. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we always so enjoy catching up with you, and we hope to see you in 2022.